Hi Year 9, welcome to lesson 4. Just like the other few times, we're going to start with a quick recap of what you did last week. So pause the video, have a go at these 5 questions all about Malawi, and then use your fact sheet to go back and double check and add in any details you might have forgotten. Okay, here's a quick example of some of the fact file filled in using information that I found online and using the slides that I created last week. So just double check that things match up, especially the key facts about Malawi, that they're in the similar sort of range. Everything else I basically plucked out of the PowerPoint that I did last week, so you should hopefully have similar things in each boxes. If you feel like you're lacking in an area or you could add a little bit more detail, then I'd encourage you to do that as well. Okay, so this week, lesson 4, we are looking at China. Just like the other few weeks, you're just going to need your fact book, a pen and a bit of paper. As always, it's really important to understand where places are that we're talking about. So that's why I always start with location, just so everyone's really clear whereabouts in the world it is that we are talking about. So hopefully by now you've got a bit more used to using this clock idea to write your descriptions. So on the screen you can see China highlighted in white, and then I've also put a bit of an arrow showing you that line of latitude going just to the south of China is the Tropic of Cancer, to try and include that in your description. So I'm going to pause the video here, start writing around things such as latitude and oceans and seas, and then I'll put another photo up with the countries that are surrounding it that you can add in. Okay, so hopefully you can add a little bit more to your description now that you can see some of the countries that are surrounding China. Remember, if you can, try and use your compass points to explain that a country's to the north or the south of China, to be a little bit more specific and precise. Okay, I'll highlight a few points that if you've missed, go back and add into your answer. So countries that are surrounding it, it's actually got 14 countries that border it, so you had a lot of different options for what you could include. But a few ones that I selected were Mongolia to the north, you've got Vietnam to the south, and then you've got Nepal to the sort of southwest of China. And Nepal is quite important because you've got the Himalayas and Mount Everest that borders sort of Nepal, China and India. You've got all the Himalaya range that runs through there. So if we look back to our first map then, as I mentioned, we've got the Pacific Ocean to the southeast of China. We've got our line of latitude, the Tropic of Cancer, that runs through the south of China as well. And hopefully you saw, but you hopefully might have known, that China is in the continent of Asia. So if we're missing any of those bits of information, go back, maybe pause the video on the other map if you need to, and add in those extra little bits. Hopefully from the map you could see that China is a really big country. It takes up a lot of the continent of Asia. So as a result, the climate's really different and diverse. So if you think back to last week, Malawi was quite a small, thin country that had a similar climate in it, same as the UK, we're quite a small country. But China, similar to India, has lots and lots of different things going on depending where it is that you're visiting and where it is that you live. So on the screen you can see that we've got a map of China and it's different colours, and each of these colours link up to a description on the right hand side of what type of climate you might typically find in that area. So you can see that it's really different. We've got sort of more mountainous areas, we've got desert areas, we've got forested areas, and as you move towards the south, obviously you're going to get maybe more of a hotter, more tropical climate. Towards the mountains you're going to get maybe a higher amount of rainfall, and then in the desert climate you're going to get very sort of hot, dry weather. So you can use some of the information on your screen, but I would maybe pick out 1 or 2 examples and do a little bit more research around that particular area in China and what type of climate you might find there, especially if you can find a climate graph and take some extra information from there of when it's wet, when it's warm, when it's cold, all that type of stuff. Next up, we're going to look at ecosystems. As you could see from the climate slide, there's a huge differences and diverse areas to China. So that's going to lead to different ecosystems. So I've just picked one as an example, but you guys can investigate different ones that you're interested in. So I've chosen the giant panda habitat as an ecosystem because pandas are my favourite animals. They're found in the central part of China in those 3 provinces, which I'm not going to try and pronounce. Pandas live in bamboo forests because this is what they need to eat. It makes up the majority of their diets. They need to be surrounded by that kind of food. The bamboo forests are very, very humid, so you're going to expect hot weather, but also it be wet at the same time. We've been experiencing some humid conditions here, so sort of similar to that, but on a bit more of an intense scale. The forests that pandas are found in have actually been reduced because of logging, which is when they cut down trees and they then use the timber for various different products. And because of farming, so they might have cleared their area and then planted crops there to be able to sell and eat. However, more recently, the Chinese government have seen that pandas are really valuable. They bring in a lot of money to the country because you might get tourists going to visit and find out about them. So they've started what they call reforestation, which is the opposite to deforestation. So this is the idea that more trees are planted to ensure that areas are protected and that there's still going to be trees there in the future. So it gives them time to grow and sort of protect the habitat where they're found. So what I'd like you to do now is research an ecosystem in China using what you found out about the climate as a bit of a guide and write a few sentences about this. So you could pick one of the desert areas, a mountainous area, some of the more foresty, sort of subtropical areas to find out about the ecosystems that you find there. Next up then is our key facts and looking at the different development indicators. If you've been struggling to find out this information, I've put a website at the top. World Bank is really, really good and really useful to find out most of the things that are on your fact book sheet. You'll just need to change the country at the end if you want to look back and look at things for Malawi or India, for example. So if you didn't know, China has the highest population in the world. It's in the billions, so you're looking for a really large number like you found for India. The birth rate, what I want you to do is, before you look into this, is maybe think what you think the birth rate's going to be based on maybe the other countries that you've looked at, and thinking back to earlier this year, you should have done maybe 1 or 2 lessons around China's one-child policy as part of your development topic. So do you think there's going to be a high birth rate or a low birth rate, and how might the one-child policy have affected this? You might want to look back over the sort of past 20 or 40 years and see when the one-child policy was introduced, how did that affect the birth rate? The GNI per capita, well, this is increasing, but also you need to bear in mind that this is the amount of money that a country has that's then divided by the population, and China has a really large population, so this might look different to what you might expect. And then HDI, so how developed is a country? Well, it's ranked 85th out of 189 countries, so definitely in the top half, but still not quite as high up as you might find the likes of Canada and Japan and the UK. So you can use my website at the top that I've given you, or other websites that you might have used previously to fill in those different key facts. Okay, next up is trade then. So China is the biggest exporter of goods in the world. So it manufactures a lot of things that we then use and is shipped out to different countries depending on their need. So here are some of the top exports, things such as cotton and tea, clothing, electrical goods, computers. So if you can now, have a look in something that you're wearing at the label, and it should say whereabouts it is made. Now, some of you might have labels that say China, other people might have places like Vietnam or the Philippines, places like that. But a lot of our clothing and goods that we have in our houses definitely come from China. So if you're watching this on a laptop or a tablet or a phone, a lot of those might have been manufactured in China as well. So if you can sort of turn it around or have a look, see where it's made, a lot of the stuff in your house, I guarantee, has come from China. So what sort of things are they bringing into the country? Well, this is stuff that we've seen elsewhere, like oil, iron, copper, coal. And some of these goods they'll be sort of bringing in because they need to use them in their country. But some of the time they'll be transforming some of these goods into something else and then exporting them again. It doesn't mean that just because it comes in, it stays in the country. They might then ship it out once it's been transformed into something new. I just want to highlight for you this website that's at the top of the screen that's really, really good, especially if you're a visual learner. It breaks down some of these imports and exports into different categories and percentages for how much there is there. So if you want to explore that and see, for example, clothing broken down into different categories, it can give you that breakdown. So when you're writing your descriptions in your fact book, you could give specific percentages of how much of that is coming into or out of China if you want to. Okay, moving on to the different industries then. So the primary industry, remember this is sort of farming and agriculture. There's about 34% of people in China that work in this particular area, and that's much higher than the more developed countries such as UK, USA, Japan. So that could be a reason why it's not got as higher HDI as some of those. Similarly, the secondary industry, remember this is things like construction, industry, manufacturing, about 30% of people work in this sector in China, and that is also higher than places like India, Japan and Brazil. So India and Brazil you often see in similar lists in terms of development and where they should be. So it's interesting that China's much higher than that. And then finally, the tertiary industry, which is all the services, about 36% of the population live in this, which is lower than places like the USA, Japan and Brazil, because the other industries, the primary and secondary, are much higher. So that's how it balances out. So you can use those percentages. You might want to do a little bit of research around that. Can you find how many work in the quaternary sector as well, and add that into your fact book. Okay, moving on to multinationals then. I've got some images here of different ones. Some of them are Chinese multinationals. Others are from elsewhere in the world but have headquarters or offices in China. So you can add some of these to your list or do your own research. This NIO, I'm not sure how you say it, is a Chinese electrical car company if you've not heard about it before, so you can maybe research them as well. So using some of those that I've got on screen, or you can do your own research to find out what multinationals are Chinese and which ones have premises and are based in China but maybe from places such as Japan or America. Okay, moving on to global cities then. So does China have any? Yes, it has 3 or 4. So the big main ones are Beijing and Shanghai, which you may have heard of before. They're sort of 2 of the biggest cities in China. You've also got Shenzhen, which is arguably a global city as well. And then you can also look at Hong Kong, which is slightly separate. So you might have heard of the state of Hong Kong, which is kind of under Chinese rule but has its own sort of autonomy as well. So you can look at Hong Kong as a global city as well, even though it is slightly separate to China, depending on who you speak to and what sort of things you're looking at. A lot of people do categorize it as coming under China as well. But just when you're looking into one of those, remember these things that make a particular place a global city. So definitely sort of economics, things to do with money, trade, finance, jobs. Is there a stock market there? All of those different things is largely what makes a place a global city. Does it have any multinational headquarters? So thinking back to the last slide, do any of them have those in those cities in China? What's the education like there? Do they have well respected universities or research institutions? Does it attract a lot of international students and people to go and work there and study there? What's the diversity like in that particular city? There should be a whole range of different people that are living there. So all different languages spoken, different cultures, different religions. So what's happening in one of those places? And then transport. Is there maybe a port for some goods if it's by a coastline? Or are there airports, or is there a way to get goods in and out of the city? So when you're looking at one of these global cities, make sure that you're writing a sentence, I would say, at least on each of those 5 different areas. Okay, finally, we're on to our interesting facts section. So, China is the 3rd largest country in the world, but it only has one time zone going across it. So, if you don't know about time zones, maybe Google and look it up. But the world is split into different time zones. So, if you've been on holiday to somewhere in Europe, for example, you might need to alter your time on your watch because you go forward by 1 or 2 or 3 hours. And this is quite normal, sort of similar slices all the way around the world. But China actually only has one time zone, and it's a similar sort of size in terms of landmass to what we call the continental USA. So that's the major part of the USA if you look at it on a map, just underneath Canada. And this has 4 time zones. So for China only to have one is pretty unusual. More people speak Mandarin as their first language than any other language in the world. That is sort of probably the main Chinese language that you might have heard on films or TV shows. China actually owns all the pandas in the world, and they essentially sort of rent them out to other countries. So they might give them to a place as a gift, but that particular country has to pay money to China to have that particular panda in a zoo, for example. And according to FIFA, football was invented in China over 2,000 years ago. So even though it's a really huge global game and often associated with the UK, it actually originated in China. So you can use some of my facts. You can pick up things that you might have learned looking into the different areas of your fact book, or you can do some additional research now to make sure that you've got a few things that you've put in that box. Okay, so what do you need to do now? Well, you need to make sure each section of your fact books are complete. So if you need to pause or rewatch this lesson, then please go back and do that. Or if you need to do any extra research, please do that to make sure that they're as full with information as they can be. Next up, you need to read through and try and learn all the information that you can about China. And again, if there's someone at home that can maybe test you on this, then that would be really useful. And then next lesson, we're going to start with our quick quiz again, just double checking that you can remember as much as you can about China. So best of luck, and I'll see you for lesson 5 next week.